Hello, I'm Mirza Turdiyev. I'm with Transnational NGO Initiative at Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs. Today, I'm undertaking a brief interview with Mr. Eric Rosenthal, who is a founder and executive director of Disability Rights International. Mr. Rosenthal has received a number of awards for his advocacy work on promoting the rights of persons with disabilities internationally. Thank you very much for today allowing us to take this interview.
Sure, my pleasure.
And it will be a very helpful tool for students and faculty alike. I have a few questions regarding organization and their activities. Could you first please give a brief overview about the Disability Rights International as the organization, and what were the expectations and goals when it was founded in 1993? And can you please give our audience a brief overview of the organization?
When I founded the organization, I looked at the international human rights community and found a total lack of awareness and action to raise the concerns of people with disabilities. My first job out of law school, I got a job documenting human rights in Mexico, and I stopped at an institution in Mexico City and was just horrified by what I saw. The Samuel Ramirez Psychiatric Facility, surrounded by barbed wire, people were held naked, eating off the floor, a totally dehumanizing experience. And I saw that, and I knew then that someone needed to take action, that there was no more dehumanizing experience than being dumped in a place like this. I had worked in psychiatric facilities in the United States, and I knew there were places that I didn't like, but I hadn't seen something this bad. In 25 years, the sad fact I found is that Mexico City is not that different from many other places in the world. Millions and millions of children and adults their lives are thrown away. They're literally left to die. Some denied medical treatment, children tied down to beds, left neglected, rocking back and forth, adults who have no hope for returning to society, and they slowly withdraw into themselves. To me, this is the largest and most overlooked human rights problem in the world today, bar none. And we want to mobilize public attention to take action to bring it to an end.
Excellent job. We observed that civil society organizations focusing on disability issues have grown within the last decade.
Yep.
What has enabled this growth? So what happened? What was the major reasons for this growth?
Right.
And where does Disability Rights International stand in this disability ecosystem?
When I started out 25 years ago, there was a disability movement in the United States. There were many growing disability rights movements in other countries. And while the leaders of those movements met each other and traveled, there was no international movement or any recognition that this was a matter of human rights. When the UN drafted the convention, the very act of bringing people together from all over the world galvanized a movement where we all learned from each other, where we understood that there are international standards. The movement has totally transformed. I was a lone call in the wilderness when I started, and now there are many, many advocacy groups. It's wonderful to see the growth of the groups. At the same time, I believe that the population that has been most overlooked are the children in institutions, the adults in psychiatric facilities. Many advocacy groups are desperately trying to end discrimination against their own members. It's so easy to forget the people who are walled off from society. Most people don't even know about them, and our unique role is we are fighting for their rights. We are challenging the very system of segregation. We are calling for a complete end to the placement of any child in an institution.
Well, you sound like DRI has been doing lots of great work, but it sounds like there is still a lot more to do.
Absolutely. There are enormous challenges, but I'm very optimistic. Yeah. We've got fabulous partners to work with all over the world. We've got a legal tool. And what's most important is knowing that this is a problem with a solution. It doesn't have to be this way. Children, whether they have a disability or not, all need to grow up with a family. We know it can be done. We know children are thrive when they have the love and attention and the legal protections needed to live in the community. The solutions exist. We've just got to get them out there. And I think when the world understands how bad orphanages are and how bad any form of institutionalization is, we can mobilize public opinion, we can mobilize charity money. Unfortunately, people now donate to orphanages and perpetuate the problem of institutionalization. Our goal is to shift the money away from orphanages and toward community services, and that's the answer. Once that incentives change, governments will follow, but we've got to mobilize popular support to make that possible.
That sounds very true. You know, in many occasions, I personally, as a disability activist, faced the question, like from people, like they ask me, why are you interested in disability issues? Do you or your family member has any disability? Do you also get such questions, and how would you respond to those questions?
Of course I do. You know, it's easy to say, well, if you yourself have a disability or you have a family member with a disability, then you'll be inspired to do it. The truth of the matter is, everyone has a family member with a disability. I have many family members with disabilities, many family members who've been diagnosed, many family members who've been locked up, and I'm not so different from most of the people in the world. It's the direct contact with individuals, with activists, both seeing the abuses and being inspired by the incredible solutions that keep me involved.
That's very great in perspective to disability, which is, I think, very much mind-changing answer. Thank you. And regarding this disabled people's organizations, or we call them DPOs, yep. What do you think, to what extent does this DPOs in NGO sector have different characteristics than the rest of the NGO community?
Well, as I said, the fact that they're made up and led by people with disabilities themselves is critically important. You know, what you see depends on where you stand. And if you've been discriminated against, if you've been subject to stereotypes that are limiting, that are disempowering, or frankly, if you've been locked up in an institution, whether you have a diagnosis or not, it will affect your perspective, and that perspective is essential as part of this movement.
Wow. And the next question is regarding this NGOs and DPOs a little bit, but my question is it necessary for traditional NGOs to be aware of issues of persons with disabilities, or should this responsibility solely fall on disabled people organizations? And why? Are there any activities or issues that only DPOs should pursue?
Well, of course, these are issues that are totally cross-cutting. You can't separate disabilities from all other issues. We found in orphanages enormous amounts of sexual abuse, trafficking of girls and women, sexual abuse of boys. I went into the Federico Mora Psychiatric Hospital in Guatemala City, and there was a 14-year-old boy locked in an isolation cell. And they said, we asked, why is he in isolation? He had had a breakdown, he had a psychiatric breakdown, and they said, we have to keep him locked up because if he's let out, he'll be sexually violated within minutes. These are not just women's issues, these are everyone's issues, but women's rights organizations need to be particularly aware of what happens to people. A large number of people with psychiatric disabilities have history of child abuse, of sexual abuse, of domestic violence, of other forms of trauma. So it's very much a women's rights issue. It's very much a human rights issue. Locking anyone up in isolation is a form of torture. It's been recognized by the United Nations. If you're Amnesty International and you're fighting torture, you can't do that unless you look at what's going on inside psychiatric institutionalization and orphanages. Anti-trafficking groups have to look at the fact that institutions are one of the major sources of people. Labor rights groups, people are forced into labor from institutions. It goes on and on. In Mexico, we did a study and found out the majority of women we interviewed with psychiatric disabilities had been sterilized without their knowledge or consent. So if you're working on reproductive rights issues, the people who are most vulnerable are the people who are perceived as not being able to make decisions about their own lives. So a close intersection that needs attention.
That's a cross-cutting issue.
Absolutely.
And my probably last question is, let's imagine if you have all the resources necessary and all the power, what would be the 3 major important disability issues you would like to address?
Well, our first one is ending any form of institutionalization. So if we had good community care, good public education and support, we would wipe out institutionalization. That one is easy. Having done that in the first morning, it would be hard to pick 2 or 3 issues to follow. But I believe that once you do that, having people with disabilities as part of society helps break down stereotypes. Once people are more included, a lot of the other forms of discrimination then start to fall. So let's stop putting people away, include them in society, and then I think all the pieces will fit together.
Well, that's a very great idea and thought, and I really appreciate for your very insightful and very useful
Thank you so much.
interview.
Nice talking to you.
All the best to your work. Thank you.